Good afternoon, everybody. And thanks for not only registering, but actually taking the time out of your busy days to attend our webinar today. What we're going to be talking about is really new patient growth in specialties like ophthalmology, right? Where marketing for elective procedures is prevalent and incredibly challenging. We'll get into some of the reasons why that is, and even more importantly, what you can do about it from a marketing optimization standpoint. Um, and then who are we? So I'm joined by my esteemed colleague Spencer from Glacial Multimedia. Spencer, since you have the word chief in your title, you can introduce yourself first.
Oh, that's very kind of you, Ross. Thank you. Yeah, my name is Spencer Pomprians. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Glacial Multimedia. We're a digital web design company. I focus specifically on the digital marketing side of the equation, with my focus being on Google Ads. Been doing that for about 19 years.
Awesome. And I'm Ross. I'm a senior account executive at Line. We are a marketing analytics and ad optimization platform focused 100% on specialty healthcare and work really closely with the team at Glacial Multimedia as ophthalmology practices, among a lot of other specialties, but have proven to be a really great fit for our platform. And yeah, glad we're teaming up on this and looking forward to it.
Likewise.
Okay. As far as the agenda, right? So here's the headline to frame our conversation today. So, how did Line, partnered with Glacial, help a premier eye practice increase the number of book consultations by 124% and do so incredibly efficiently, right? So, we're reducing their cost per booking by 55% in the process. Um, I think off the bat, the good news for everyone here is that it wasn't, like rocket science or something that isn't necessarily replicable by other practices. Herzig is indeed an extremely well run practice in a lot of ways, but we've seen similar results in a lot of cases. And hopefully, a takeaway of this is that with the right agency partner and the right technologies in place, there are a few key but really pretty simple things that can have a really dramatic impact on your new patient growth, even in what's a pretty challenging time for elective procedures. Okay. So a little bit on that. I mean, if you're with an ophthalmology practice or a plastic surgery practice or an oral surgery practice, right? You're all pretty well aware of the big drop in demand for elective procedures, especially when you compare it to a period of pretty high demand just a few years ago, especially during COVID. So anytime there's more uncertainty in the economy, I mean, we've been hearing the word recession pop up for quite a while now, right? So there's always going to be more patient hesitation to spend, especially with the high out-of-pocket costs of elective procedures that make it tougher for something like vision correction to remain at the top of everyone's priority list, right? So it's Econ 101, but whenever there's decline in demand, always going to drive increased competition. So ultimately, there's more practices fighting for less qualified patients, right? Um, Good news is that our data shows that interest is definitely still there. It just may be harder than ever to convert that interest into a book consult. And I think the just the general behavior of elective patients is worth touching on quickly, because these patients just don't behave like traditional healthcare consumers, right? They're comparing options across multiple practices. They're doing a lot of online research before ever reaching out. I think their expectations are different, right? They expect a more personalized experience from the very first touch point. And all of these are reasons why marketing matters, right? So marketing, and I'd say specifically optimizing your marketing, is the biggest lever that practices have to win a consultation compared to the competition. There are, of course, a lot of other important factors that need attention and are worth focusing on, right? Your call flows and your web lead follow up and your consultation talk track. But marketing is definitely the foundation of your patient funnel that's going to provide the opportunity for anything post marketing to even matter. So, you know, what's a good analogy here? Don't necessarily need to focus on fixing the aerodynamics of our oar if there's a hole in your boat, right? There's a lot of different ways you could go with that. But more and more, I think practices are realizing that digital marketing especially, is a necessary part of the marketing strategy to meet elective patients where they are spending the majority of their time today, right?
And I think, what a lot of our practices are finding, especially with demand being down a little bit, we see a big increase in no-show rates. That's been a problem. It's getting the most bang for your buck out of the marketing that you already have. So you're probably familiar with all those platforms, Meta, Google Ads, Bing Ads, everything else. But what's the point of spending a ton of money on marketing if it's not actually driving results? So that's what a lot of practices are looking to solve here is how can we actually get more out of the marketing we're already doing? And that's something that Line actually helps solve in a pretty significant way. So
Okay.
go ahead, Ross.
Well, let me kick this one off. So now that the stage is set, we'll talk about a real example of a practice who looked at the landscape, right, and decided to tackle it head on. So, Herzig Eye Institute, one of Canada's premier providers of elective vision correction procedures, locations in Toronto, Ottawa. I've personally never been to Canada, but I'm pretty sure those are like big cities with a lot of competition, right? So, I know they've been working with you guys, the Glacial team, for a while now, and then we joined the picture a couple of years ago, and we'll talk about some of the specific things that have changed for them in these 2 years that have led to some pretty dramatic results that we showed at the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. The marketing team at Herzig is super savvy. They have a really great process as well post lead, really good follow-ups, really good speed to lead, just good processes throughout. And they spend a really decent chunk of change on their marketing. So the question wasn't really about should we do marketing, should we not do marketing? It was how do we get the most out of the marketing that we're already doing? And that's what we tried to solve here with Line in our existing campaigns. So before Line came on board here, we've been working with Herzig for maybe 4 or 5 years or so. And their campaign looked like a lot of Google ad and Meta ad type campaigns where we're primarily focused on optimizing for lead generation, be that phone calls or form fills, self-tests, things like that. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. That's what most practices are probably doing, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we're, growing the business just because we're getting a lot of leads. Herzig was also using an older call tracking platform that probably a lot of people have used or are familiar with that is great at identifying how many calls you got, but really not so good at passing that information back to where it can be useful. How many leads did we get out of that? How many booked appointments, surgeries, so on and so forth. And nothing was really going back to Google Ads or these other platforms that told these platforms what was working and what was not working. So that potentially creates a lot of marketing waste. Like I said, you don't necessarily know that a lead equals a booking. Hopefully hope your agency is focused on high quality keywords and that's going to help and things like that. But a keyword that drove 20 leads, they could have driven zero bookings out of that. And you don't really have any visibility with how these platforms operate normally. So no insight to how many calls are actually becoming new patients. So that's a big problem we hear even with good CRMs. It's just really, really hard to quantify how many calls you're getting that actually turn into patients. Really hard to measure that and see if that's a successful metric or not. And as a result of that, the Google ad and Meta campaigns are really only optimizing for signals that generate leads and not signals that generate booked appointments or anything beyond that.
And then there's also a downstream effect of inefficient marketing that affects the call center and the operations team, right? We'll talk more about this, but if you're optimizing your campaigns for maximizing calls and clicks, right, you're going to drive a lot of calls from low intent or no intent leads that prove to be a huge burden on the front desk or call center of a practice. In my mind, the only thing that's worse than the phone not ringing is the phone ringing from a low intent lead that causes a high intent lead to wait on hold too long before they then call another practice, right? So some people look at successful marketing, I think, as a pure volume game, right? Get as many shots on goal as possible and you're bound to make some. That approach from our perspective, and I think Glacial as well, is flawed for many reasons that we'll get into, but can have major ripple effects that cause inefficiencies in a lot of other parts of your practice as well.
So we had been managing this campaign for Herzig for many years. Like I said, pretty healthy budgets, very varied campaign in terms of display campaign, search campaign, so on and so forth. And historically speaking, the lead generation had been good cost per lead, good conversion rates, things like that. But something really meaningful happened when we switched to Line. Is that now we were focusing entirely on booked appointments and not leads. Totally game changing in how we managed the campaign, how we spoke with the Herzig team in terms of determining strategy, because now I can see when I'm managing the campaign, what keywords are driving booked appointments. Maybe the cost keywords are ineffective booked appointment generators, even though they get a lot of leads. Maybe those people don't convert. Now I can see that with Line. And, that helps our attribution. We can see which campaigns are most successful, which campaigns are least successful. That helps me go back to the Herzig team and be like, do we want to do anything about this? Do we want to capitalize on this campaign that's doing really well? Do we want to minimize or change this campaign that's not doing very well? And allows for more in-depth and helpful strategic discussions. But really, maybe the most underrated but significant part of this is that Google can use these signals to optimize the campaign. So Google's pretty good at telling it, doing what you tell it to do for the most part. If you tell it to get clicks, it's going to get clicks. If you tell it to get leads, it's going to get leads. And with Line, we can now tell it to get booked appointments and use that as the golden metric for Google Ads. And Google behind the scenes is looking at the demographics, the keywords, the ad copy combinations, literally hundreds of data points that result in those booked appointment leads and optimizing for those specifically.
Yep. And we're talking a little bit about the how of Line is allowing you and the agencies to use actual booked appointments in the ways we're describing. So now, like, you guys would be smart to go back to your marketing teams or your agencies after this and ask them, like, are you optimizing our campaigns for booked appointments? And they'll probably be like no, or how do we do that? Right. So that's where Line comes in, like as a technology that powers an agency or a marketing team, like a Glacial, to be able to make the changes that we're suggesting to your marketing optimization strategy. So what we're really doing, right, is tracking and analyzing all of your patient interactions, meaning calls, web form submissions, online bookings too. Those are becoming more and more prevalent in the space as well. But ultimately understanding the true source of each interaction, so where it came from, the quality of the interaction, right? Was it actually a new lead or not? And the outcome. Did it lead to a booked appointment? And if not, what was the reason why? Right. So a key to this, and something I know Spencer appreciates too, is the fact that we don't need to rely on any of your staff for any part of the data. So it's really all happening in the background. But the result is that you and your agency can now understand true bookings by marketing source across all of your touch points. And this data is absolutely critical, as Spencer was describing, to send back to the ad platforms, Google and Meta, in a HIPAA compliant way, of course, to optimize your campaigns for actual booked appointments.
I think that's
So,
a super significant point too.
yeah,
Sorry to interrupt, but the fact you can technically do these things with a CRM, but it requires a tremendous amount of effort from your staff. It requires them being on the ball all the time, marking appointments correctly, making sure they're documenting what's happening with phone calls. And Line does that in real time, and it feeds this back into the marketing platforms in real time as well. So there's no manual effort involved once it's all set up.
yeah. So at the highest level, right, compared to a CRM, it's capturing way more data automatically and further down the funnel, and then putting that data to good use automatically as well by integrating with the ad platform so that they can use this data ultimately as their new success signals. Um, and one thing that's this is an example that I think is worth going through, but one thing that's incredibly tricky for healthcare groups and organizations trying to do this themselves with something like a CRM is the fact that it's super common for patients to have multiple touch points with your practice before they end up scheduling an appointment. It's challenging for proper attribution, for proper lead counts, proper optimization of campaigns like we're describing. This is something that Line's going to automatically solve for as well. This is a common example of something that happens all the time, right? So the bottom interaction here is a patient that comes from a Google ad and submits a form on your website. Maybe it's a LASIK self-test or cataract self-test, right? Your team then follows up with them, step two, with an outbound call to try to schedule them. And they get the patient on the phone, but they don't book because of a scheduling issue. So Michael, in this case, he wanted to come in tomorrow, but maybe there wasn't availability until next week. So he needed to go back and check his calendar before calling back in and scheduling, which he does. He calls back in later, but it's after hours, right? After 6 o'clock, call center's closed. He leaves a voicemail. And then he realizes that, hey, I can just go and actually book myself online. This practice has an online booking tool, which is great, closing that loop. The challenge for this from marketing attribution standpoint is that in a vacuum, this booking event, right, the online booking looks like it came organically. That's how Michael went and found the practice as his last touch to go and actually submit that booking. But really, it needs to be tied to the Google ad that got him to reach out in the first place. That's the true marketing source that matters. And without something like this, totally blind to the fact that this Google ad campaign drove a booked appointment, critical piece of information to then send back to Google to show that, hey, this campaign drove a booked appointment, even though it happened via another channel and another method later down the funnel, right? Also, easy for this to count as 3 or 4 leads, right? We're going to know this is just one lead, one booked appointment, and all that's reconciled automatically. So a lot of the headaches involved with reconciling phone calls, online bookings, form submissions, deduping, none of that has to happen with a tool like this.
And that attribution is a huge factor in why these campaigns with Line can be so successful. Because, like I said earlier, Google's very good at telling it or doing what you tell it to do. And I don't know how many folks were doing Google ads 10 years ago or so when it was very common to do click-based optimization. It seems ridiculous now looking at that, but saying, how many clicks did I get? And reporting to the practice, oh, your click-through rate was X%. It seems ridiculous in hindsight. And elevating to lead-based tracking, looking at calls and form fills and all these things, and managing campaigns based on their conversion rate. And now we're evolving it again with Line to go right to that booked appointment. And that attribution from the previous slide is super important. Being able to attribute that person who did eventually convert organically to a Google ad lead, but not just Google ads as a whole, but what keyword drove that lead? What ad copy variant drove that lead? What time of day of the week, zip code, so on and so forth. That is extremely valuable information that can be used to make the campaigns much better as time goes on. So the results here. Herzig started this, and we ran it for about 7 months. That's what the case study is looking at here. Very minimal changes to campaign strategy. Keyword variants and things like that, but no changes to budget, no major shifts in the overall strategy. Really, the only addition here was line, and we saw 124% increase in total bookings with a 55% decrease in average cost per booking. And you can see here pretty clearly, not perfectly here, but it basically got better every single month after the implementation until the end of the case study. And it continues to get better. It's been probably about 7 months since this ended, thereabouts. And it continues to improve. We continue to see trends. We continue to make opportunistic changes to the campaign strategy based on what line tells us works and doesn't work from that new patient booked appointment metric.
Yeah, and I really like this view, right? Because it just shows like it doesn't take forever to see real results. It does take some time for the optimization to really take effect,
This is
30
a
to
pretty typical
45 days,
Google
right?
ad thing, 90 days or so
Yeah,
is, anything you do in Google ads, you can expect a 2 to 3 month window before it starts
yeah.
really optimizing.
But even with this, right, as you can see in month 4, almost double the number of bookings and half the cost per booking pretty quickly. So, as Spencer said, kept improving from there. And I think a big thing now that it has maintained its peak for so long is that it's extremely formulaic for the team at Herzig and for Glacial to understand the impacts of adjustments to the budget, right? If I improve or increase or decrease the spend by X, exactly how many new patient bookings is that going to result in? Which is everything. I mean, it's turning something that was a lot of guesswork previously into just more simple math, right? Um, I want to talk about this because the good agencies, there's a lot of marketing agencies out there, right? The good ones, like Glacial, recognize that in order to truly maximize the outcomes from their marketing campaigns, like there may be additional technology needed through something like Line for those next level insights. And then for us as the technology platform, we rely heavily on the agency to be, I mean, they're the ones that are the experts of the marketing, right? The execution of the campaigns, budget allocation, SEO rankings, the countless things that they impact that we have no business touching. But what your agency should be is open-minded about additional ways to optimize your marketing. And that's what we so appreciated about the team at Glacial and created what really is a symbiotic relationship where results are more than just the sum of the parts in this case.
Yeah, and likewise, like I mentioned at the beginning, I've been doing Google ads for about 19 years, and it's been my life for a long time. Line is easily the most significant product that's come out in that time frame. There's been a lot of vendors we've worked with, a lot of cool things that are done. AI is really big these days in terms of optimizing campaigns and things like this. But in my opinion, there has not been a more significant product for running marketing campaigns than Line, in terms of what it can do for your business, focusing on what really matters, instead of lead gen or clicks or anything else that maybe doesn't actually grow your business in the end.
Very nice, Spencer. I'm blushing. Thanks. Um, and I think this is the what we'll leave you with, right? So main takeaways, ultimately, like if you want best results from the marketing campaigns, not the most calls, not the most clicks, not even the most leads, right? But the most patients. Like you really have to start optimizing for real patient appointments because your campaigns are only going to be as good as the conversion signals that you're sending them. It's going to allow your ads to be extremely precise and targeted for driving the right types of patients who need your services and are actually going to like follow through, creating huge wins for, yes, the marketing team and marketing budget, but also for the operational side of your practice, who's going to be much more efficient as well. So thank you, everybody. If you want more information about Glacial Multimedia or Line, we have a QR code here that'll lead to our websites for additional info. And let's see what time it is. We've got a couple
Um,
minutes for
uh,
questions, it looks like, if anybody has any.
yeah, please feel free. Just use the chat feature. Shoot over some questions if you have some. Ross and I can hang out for a few minutes. Link looks like Link has a question, and that might be a question for you, Ross.
Longest amount of time for a booking. Here's Link's question to set the stage. What is the longest amount of time for a booking you suggest is usable to tie back an initial marketing campaign? Is 1 year too long? I would say no, right? Because it's all about what is the thing that drove that patient to reach out as the initial put touch in the first place, right? The nice thing about capturing the initial touch of every interaction is that with the right types of dashboards, you should be able to filter them by initial and last touch. So depending on what it is your initiative is, like you can look at it by the initial touch to get what I would say is the true attribution or marketing source, even for a booking that happens over a year down the road. But it may make sense to also look at it as a last touch to see, okay, well, there could have been some things that happened between there. So let's take that into consideration as well in that type of example.
And Google does also factor that into its own algorithm. It does look at basically dynamic attribution. So it does look at the other touch points, how recent they were to the final touch point and the first touch point, and it does award partial leads as a result of that. So it's a little bit of a different equation than what Line has going on, but it does help us on the optimization side determine what actually drove that lead. Hopefully that was a uh, respectable answer for you, Link.
Here's another question from Melissa. Does Line do auto calls back to patients, or is this only a tracking analytics platform? Important question. And thank you, Melissa, for asking that because we have focused a lot of the talk today on the call piece of this. We've talked about the fact that there's a lot of other interaction types that happen, especially with ophthalmology, but a lot of healthcare practices, right? There's a lot of form submissions and form fills that are driven from paid marketing. There's online bookings as well. One of the big gaps that we do see in conversion is what I would refer to as the speed to lead, right? How fast a team is able to get back to a new lead. I think there is also kind of a general thought that exists among some practices that a self-test isn't a high intent lead or high intent patient, right? Maybe just a shopper or something like that. Well, that the results are going to indicate that that is true if you take a long time to get back to them. But groups like Herzig have actually proved that the conversion rates of form submissions in ophthalmology, even self-tests, can be incredibly high when you make it a point to get back to people really quickly. So she's referencing an auto call. That actually is something that we help teams with as well, where essentially as soon as a new lead is submitted, um, the phones at the call center or the front desk of a practice will ring where the front desk staff can answer it and they'll hear, you have a new LASIK lead from Spencer, press one to connect now. So all they have to do is answer the phone, which hopefully they're decent at today, press one, and we're dialing out to that patient for them right away, as opposed to having your team monitor an email inbox or a CRM to see when a lead comes in and then make a decision on, do I have time to follow up right now, or can I do that after my next thing? And then that becomes a next thing. And we know what happens with speed to lead when that's the case. So, yes, that is also something, the whole like actual conversion of the leads themselves. There's more we can talk about there as well.
Any other questions from anybody? Otherwise, we'll let people get a whole 2 minutes back of their day.
2 minutes. Awesome. Well, I think we're done. And Spencer, appreciate you joining me on this. Let's do it
Likewise,
again.
it's a pleasure. Absolutely. Thank you, everybody, for joining.
Bye, everyone.